and therefore you would be in a power differential position over them, again, if your consciousness were so inclined to do something like that to information, and therefore you could use that weapon, use that knowledge practically as a weapon against those individuals who lacked it. So that is what the dark usage of occult information is all about. We're going to focus on the light Rosicrucian tradition, how this information can be used to free people, how it can be used to raise consciousness. Okay, so the first thing is that it is the esoteric Christian tradition, and it is dedicated to the true spiritual teachings of Christ consciousness. Okay, rather than religious dogma that has been built up around the story about the man known as the Christ. Okay, that's the exoteric Christian tradition, and that's not what we'll be focusing on here today, because as I've stated very much and repeatedly in my work, and also built my work is of course related to the exoteric Christian tradition, is built upon the work of many others who have labored to expose the astro-theological underpinnings of exoteric religion. We're going to be basically setting that to the side tonight and talking about the esoteric teachings of this occult tradition known as Rosicrucianism. So we have to make that distinction clear. Secondly, we have to basically explain how these teachings are effectively communicated. They have been communicated throughout time in the form of, basically in two ways, in the form of allegory and symbolism. These are two communication methodologies that are favored in all occult traditions, but specifically favored in Rosicrucianism. Now, allegory, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is a way of teaching that involves telling people a story, through literature or through word of mouth or by poetry or even pictures, okay? And these stories can be interpreted to reveal hidden meanings or esoteric understandings that have been traditionally reserved for a small select group of people that want to go deeper to the core of things rather than, again, as I've said, skirt the issue and just look on the surface. So an allegory is a story that is told in a covert way. It's kind of put off in a fictional way, but it's really telling about what's going on in the real world. So it's revealing a hidden meaning, and that is traditionally a moral lesson. It's teaching a moral tale, similar to a parable. It's a story about people who may or may not have existed, but it's explaining something that is applicable to the real world situation that we exist in, and it's teaching a moral lesson. Now, symbolism is very important to all occult traditions, and that's teaching moral lessons through symbols, through forms, archetypal forms often, colors, shapes, representations, things that are used to represent other things. That is often a heady concept to people who aren't symbol literate. They can't quite make the distinction and recognize, well, this shape is being used to represent this concept or idea. That's generally what symbolism is there to do, and symbolism plays a huge central role in Rosicrucianism. So we're going to look at those two aspects, but I want to tell people what the general overarching point of this tradition actually is. It is to get people through these communication mediums, namely allegory and symbolism, to recognize the existence and the eternal presence of the laws of nature, of natural law. Okay, you can call that God's law, you can call that the law of the universe, the law of creation, moral law, okay? And to align ourselves with that. That's what these teachings are there to guide us to do, to understand that there is natural law in place and to align our will with that will of creation. which was not set in place by mankind. Mankind is a part of that creation process, but it is our goal to align ourselves by our willpower with that higher force, that higher will that is directed by natural law. This, of course, really equates to the birth of conscience in another human being. And like other occult traditions, such as Kabbalah or Freemasonry, that is indeed what Rosicrucianism is attempting to convey. It is attempting to convey the definitive knowledge of the difference between right and wrong to the initiate, okay, to the entered apprentice into this tradition, one who wants to learn and is an apprentice under those who have already acquired and do indeed possess that knowledge of those natural laws and the definitive difference between right and wrong, and then can study that information that is then presented either in allegory, symbolism, or even in written tradition, okay, by written works, and then to choose willfully by one's own free will, okay, using their own consciousness, using their own thoughts, emotions, and actions to willfully make the decision to choose the right over the wrong, choosing of right action over wrong action. And ultimately, this entire tradition could be boiled down to a single tenet, which is the same single tenet that the true Christ consciousness teachings have always been about conveying, and that is the golden rule: to do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Treat others as you would prefer to be treated. It is actually that simple and can be summed up in that regard. Unfortunately, so much is done to obfuscate through the exoteric tradition and lay down all kinds of controls, rules that don't really make any sense to almost put people off from that basic truth that that's what is necessary to be done in order to really change our reality for the better. So let's start by taking a look at some of the symbolism of this tradition. And, of course, the rose and the cross is going to be the first thing that people are naturally attracted to because it is, of course, the main symbol of this tradition. So let's start breaking down the symbolism of the rose cross itself. All of the symbolism I'll be talking about, people who may be familiar with other occult traditions will recognize has a symbolic connection to other traditions, such as Christianity, astrology, alchemy, Kabbalah, Freemasonry, Tarot, and many others. Okay? So all of these traditions have similar symbology in them, and there's a reason for that. It's because, like Rosicrucianism, they are all derived from the same basic ancient mystery tradition teachings that have always been there to try to communicate that natural law understanding and the willful alignment to it. So I'll start with the cross, okay, because the rose is the real key to all of it, and I'll leave that for a little bit later. Let's begin with what the cross represents. Of course, people are familiar with the symbol of the cross because it is the main symbol of the exoteric Christian religion as well. But in Rosicrucianism, what the cross represents is basically the physical world. Okay? It represents physical incarnation into the world. It represents that we are having a human experience in a physical domain, but we are spiritual beings having that human experience. The cross is an archetypal symbol. It is often used to represent a central focal point or fulcrum, like a bullseye target or a target, okay? Aim to get to the center of something. And that is what a cross basically represents. It represents the center. And in this case, it represents the center of the self. It is the spinal column or the archetypal world tree, okay? In Eastern traditions, which Rosicrucianism delves into, but it is sort of like a complementary tradition in the West to Eastern mystery traditions that have traditionally been conveyed in the Middle East, the Far East, China, the Orient, etc. So the Western mystery tradition of Rosicrucianism views the cross as again, the spinal column, the world tree. Okay, it has been known as in other traditions. Again, in Eastern traditions, the tradition that teaches about the chakras, the energy vortices within the body. This ties into Rosicrucianism when we talk about the etheric body, okay, known as the vital body, which we're going to get to later on, the different components of the constitution of mankind, of ourselves, okay, the different aspects of thought and emotions, the quality of emotions. The cross is the center point of that spinal column, okay, that cross bar that goes across horizontally from the vertical, and it joins in the center to form 4 arms, okay? That center point represents the center of ourselves, and the center of ourselves is the heart, all right? The heart chakra is the middle chakra in the Eastern tradition. The Vedic tradition teaches about the chakras or the energy vortices within our body. The heart chakra is the very middle. It's the 4th of the 7 chakras aligned on the spinal column. And this balance point, okay, this fulcrum point, the center, has just traditionally been used to represent the generative principle of everything, the point from which everything grows from, okay? It is the creative essence of the individual, the creative essence of all of nature. So that center point is representative of the center of nature and the center of the self. That's why the rose is placed at the fulcrum point. That's why it's in the middle of the cross. It's not at the top, it's not at the bottom, it's in the middle. It's actually at the fulcrum point where the crossbar crosses the upright, okay? So that's what the cross represents. It represents physical incarnation into the world, us as spiritual beings having a human experience, the center of the self, the spinal column, the archetypal world tree, okay, of which the center point is the heart. And that brings us, of course, to the rose. The rose is the heart itself, okay? It is right at that crossing point. It represents compassion. It represents true care. It represents the generative principle, again, which is care. That which we care about, that which we focus our attention upon, is what we manifest in our reality. So what we care about is the quality of our cares is going to dictate the quality of our life, basically. So we need to put care onto something that is higher than just the physical reality in which we live. We need to put care upon things like principles, upon things like morality, upon things like understanding, upon things like learning about ourselves in a deep way, such that we make a connection, forge a connection to the higher self. The rose represents the sacred feminine. Again, this is the center point, okay? If we just look at the language of why the rose out of any other flower is chosen, we'll come upon some alchemical green language, okay, which is symbolic language. This tradition is about resurrection. It is about coming from a place of unconsciousness and rising in consciousness such that we understand how the laws of nature and the workings of nature are constructed so that we can live more harmoniously within them, within that living dynamic system, okay? And we can become co-creators with that force. The rose, okay, the word rose is the past tense of rise. Okay, and that's what this whole tradition is about. Rising, resurrection, coming up from a deadened state of awareness, unconsciousness, and rising to consciousness. So this in itself is also green language. Okay, and the symbols of resurrection in Rosicrucianism, we will often find, are very similar to some of the symbols in its sister tradition of Freemasonry, which also has tons of resurrection symbolism within it, and I've covered that pretty extensively on some of my podcasts at my website.